So the way that I start all of my classes is with an acknowledgement of country. So if you're from Australia, you may have seen an acknowledgement of country before. And if you're from overseas, maybe this is your first time. So I'm zooming in from Meadowbank, which is the Wallumedegal land. And so I acknowledge the elders of the Wallumedegal people of the Eora Nation. And I remember that they fished and danced and hunted here on this land, and they still do. So you can pop down. So acknowledgement of country is done by someone who's non-Indigenous like me, to recognize the traditional owners of the land. And a welcome to country is done by an elder welcoming you onto their land. So we kind of use this moment at Hillsong for a couple of reasons, and I thought maybe I'd share that in case you haven't ever seen it before. If you know the land that you're on and you know the traditional owners, you can pop it in the chat and to acknowledge them as well. But as a non-Indigenous person, why do I acknowledge country? Well, I acknowledge country because it allows me to remember the land, and with that, to remember Creator God. So theologians use a really complicated word, immanence, to describe how the Spirit is alive and evident within the land. And I think we can often be unaware of God in our midst. So God isn't just in heaven a long way away, he's here. And so that's something that I like to remember at the beginning of every class. The second reason that I like to do this is because it's a matter of justice. I like to acknowledge elders because at times the church hasn't acknowledged elders and really given them the honor that they deserve. So I do this because in Romans 13 verse 7, it says to give honor where honor is due. So this is a part of me doing that. And the final reason is because we're embodied. So you can pat the bits of your body that are available on the screen to see. You are body. And we are all body, but in the virtual environment, we often don't, we have to work hard to remember that we're bodies and that we are finite. We're limited to one place in one time. We have access via the internet to each other around the world, but you are called to the place where you are right now. And just as Jesus was called to, one place, one time, and he served the people around him. And so when I walk on Wallumedegal land, I walk with Jesus, and I walk with the understanding that I am sent to this place in this time. And as we acknowledge land, it makes me remember that we're colliding, that our stories are colliding in this space. And so this is a part of why I do acknowledgement of country. And I'd really like to pray just to start. Is that okay? Awesome. God, we just thank you so much that you are in this Zoom. I thank you that you're present in the land and you're present here where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name. I ask that you be in this class, that you would help us to attend to you, and that you would help us open our eyes to justice. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so I thought I'd bring a scripture. We start every class at Hillsong with a scripture, and I thought I'd bring one that I love and that really is a part of the reason as to why I'm involved in this area. So we just reflected on our different locations, and we're looking at justice. So why justice? In Micah 6:8, the Bible tells us that he's shown you, O mortal, what is good. And we remembered that we're mortal. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. This is kind of a motto that I love. I think if we could make something simple that we remembered about, what God is asking of us, this is it. It's the tone with which I approach today. It's also, this content from today is from our Theology of Social Justice lectures. So Dorothy Mendez is in the chat. She's involved in our Theology of Social Justice, and we have various faculty that kind of cycle through this unit and have helped create kind of our way of attending to justice. But the questions that we answer in this class really emerge out of engagement with the world. And there's the class is a 12-week class, and so we don't have time to cover everything today in 45 minutes. There are readings and there are essays that you do in order to really get deeper into the issue of justice. But some of the questions that we ask in this class and that I'm going to try and cover today are, does Christianity cancel the need for justice? Or can it perfect justice? What difference does Jesus actually make? So these are some of the questions that we'll be looking at today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into me. This is my heart. This is Ignatius Sherman on the left, and he is 2. He is a crack up. He's a little entity. And this is my husband, Tim, who's on the right. He is a YouTuber for a Sydney tools company, and we're quite crazy creative family, and this is kind of my world. But you know, my world at Hillsong has gone back a long time. So I joined when I was aged 5, and I've been really involved in Hillsong in various parts of the organization. Braylon, you love tools. That's so great. We can have parties where you talk about tools and I will leave the room because I don't know anything about tools. And my husband has been very gracious to come on this journey in theology with me. So I'm a songwriter. I started out as a songwriter at Hillsong Church, and I performed on most of the albums between 96 and 2003. So I know most of you weren't born then, and that's okay. But this is kind of where I started at Hillsong Church. So I did the Christmas Spectacular as a fairy with Laura Toggs, who you can see here maybe. And, you know, I sang with the Hillsong team. I toured New Zealand, the Philippines, and Singapore with Darlene Check. And after that, I enrolled in a theology degree because I really wanted to go a little bit deeper. And so I did a thesis I continued along and I did my MPhil, and I looked at the theological, the musicological, and the business practices of Hillsong Church. And in 10 years, and after this, I was offered a full ride scholarship to Fuller in Los Angeles to do a PhD. So, and this is where this tree comes in. It's an extremely important tree for me because this is where I sat after I received the email saying, you have a full ride scholarship to Fuller. What would you like to study? And so I walked outside and I sat on this tree and I prayed, God, what would you have me look at in my PhD? And this is really where I heard God talk to me about restorative justice. So I was thinking through my PhD topic, and I really felt God make me notice the tree. And I thought about how long that tree had been there, maybe what it had seen in its lifetime. And I realized it was probably more than 200 years old, and it had probably seen colonization and the process of Australia being made. It was on Australia Street in Newtown. And so I started to think, oh, wow, you know, how would we really explain our land? And I felt God say to me, well, why don't you map the Bible onto Australia? So I don't know if you know this, but Australia's not in the Bible. There are no cockatoos or kangaroos. There's no turtles even. There's not really much to work with. So I thought that was a really strange question. Why would God ask me to do this? And so I thought, well, let's start with where we can start. So I thought, okay, well, maybe we start with, you know, people like Herod and Pontius Pilate, and maybe they can map onto the Prime Minister. And maybe I can think about Nicodemus as being maybe one of the Sydney Uni lecturers who creeps out in the middle of the night to ask Jesus a question. And then I felt like God say, where's Jesus in this picture? And I had a bit of a revelation. I knew that Jesus wasn't Roman. He was Jewish, and he was born in a town about which there was a saying, nothing good comes from Nazareth. And so I thought, where would that be in Australia? And I thought, maybe if Jesus was born today, maybe he'd be born in an Aboriginal town out in the Kimberleys in outback Australia. And maybe God would walk into Sydney as an Aboriginal man. And I suddenly understood why the city's leaders might want to crucify him as he declared that he was God. But this isn't actually a new thought. In fact, Native American author Richard Twist presents the idea of Jesus as an Aboriginal boy. But this moment, it changed the way that I read the Bible, and it's changed my paradigm about how I've done theology ever since. So I decided that this was something I needed to explore more of. And so my PhD was done with 3 Aboriginal pastoral leaders in urban cities around Australia. I traveled around Australia and I listened to Aboriginal led church. I attended it. I attended 89 services. I did whatever pastors asked me to do, put out chairs, sing a song. I participated in whatever way I could, and I decided to listen and to learn. So some of these churches may not be considered cool by marketing standards, but one of the really beautiful things is that Hillsong Church's vision statement says, I see a church that champions the cause of local churches everywhere, encouraging them to be all God has called them to be. And so it was a joy to be able to write up the stories that I encountered in this time in a book that's been published in 2019, which is about worship as well as social engagement in these Aboriginal-led churches, which were quite extraordinary. So that's a little bit about me. But I'd love to ask you, what do you think that justice is? Big question, right? You might want to take a couple of seconds and jot it into the chat. What do you think justice is? It's okay if you don't feel like you want to share it. You could pop it onto a document and you could have a look at it and maybe check at the end of this class and see whether, you've revised your ideas around what justice is. Is anyone brave enough? What is justice? It's a big question, right? I can see you all, some of you, Max Bennett, beautiful location. Justice. Well, let's start at the beginning. So the English word justice comes from the Latin word jus, which means right or law. The concept of justice is considered to be really foundational to Western civilization. And the Oxford Dictionary defines a just person as someone who's fair, who typically does what is morally right and is disposed to giving everyone his or her due. Where did these ideas come from? Well, to find that out, we've got to go back and have a look at some of the philosophy around justice. And this is where we land in Greece. In ancient Greece, justice has been a topic of debate for philosophers since at least Plato in 375 BC. So there's a long tradition around this word. In Plato's Republic, the philosopher Socrates says that justice is the richest kind of good. He also says that a completely good society would comprise of 4 things. And I love this so much. He says that leaders would exercise wisdom, that defenders would exercise courage, that creators would exercise temperance or self-control, and that all of these people would exercise justice. So what does he mean by the word justice in this context? Well, he actually means that these classes of people wouldn't prevent each other from doing their work. So you think about the way that leaders and defenders and creators work together. In his mind, it was really about being allowed to make your contribution to society. It's kind of beautiful, right? The idea that we all have this place. But of course, there were many kind of challenges in this, because in this kind of a context, citizenship was very conditional, and, the rights of women and children weren't necessarily as we would see them today. So then we moved to Aristotle. Aristotle was trained by Plato, and he's well known for presenting the cardinal virtues, which he considered to make a good or a moral person. He clarified justice as no less and no more than exactly what you deserve. So for him, justice was something more fundamental than, say, an emotional connection that we have with people. He saw it not as optional, but as due to them. So he saw justice as different from mercy, because mercy was about giving someone more than what they were due. So less than, what they were due. So in the case of a crime, for example, when someone is given a sentence, mercy would be reducing that sentence. and giving them less than what was, theirs to pay. On the other side, he saw charity as being given more than what you are due. So, where you extend some, food or, finance to someone who, didn't have, that this would be, basically charity. And so he says that we can beg for mercy or for charity, but justice can be demanded. Scanlon says justice is what we owe to each other. It's fundamental to being human. So what you can note from this is that early conversations about justice were mainly about social classes, and they were mainly about groups of people and how they interacted. So that at the end of the Middle Ages, the concept of an individual began to emerge. And this is something that took a long time to become formalized or accepted. But now we're very steeped in this idea that we as a person have, rights and that we have responsibilities. There's a sense that the society that we're a part of is the sum of its parts. So this is now reflected in many of the ideas around justice today, this tension between society and the individual. So I'm going to briefly outline 4 really big ideas that hopefully will guide us through the idea of justice and help us think about some of the really big questions that justice brings up. I should have asked you, Rochelle, as well. Are we finishing at 10:45?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, no worries. We'll rush through this. Okay, so procedural justice is the first one that we're going to look at. So this is really the concept of fairness or fair treatment is developed by this kind of justice. It's often associated with our legal system. And in most cases, this type of justice is about processes. So unbiased decision-making and applying all rules fairly. It's also represented in our legal system, in our parliaments, in the creation of the rules. Everybody contributes to the rules that they're a part of. That's the idea. Fair procedure is for when things go wrong. So you think about negotiation, arbitration, and some of those things are encapsulated in this idea of fair process. So if you're interested, I can give you some of these slides so you can get some of these ideas in greater depth. But basically, in a nutshell, there are 3 main kind of ideas which are often repeated by people when they're talking about justice in society today. So utilitarianism, this is where justice depends on you and your actions. You get what you do. This is this idea. Contractualism is the idea that we're all self-interested individuals in a contract with the state. So there are various philosophers who have promoted this idea throughout history. And egalitarianism, everyone is equal before the law. You might have heard these ideas. So we're going to look at it a little bit more concretely with a particular example that's quite important globally. So on February 26, 2012, George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch captain in a neighborhood in Sanford, Florida, and he called 911 to report a suspicious person. That person was Trayvon Martin. He was 17 and he was returning from a 7-Eleven with a bag of Skittles and a drink. Zimmerman was instructed by the 911 operator not to get out of his vehicle and not to approach the suspect. However, he did. So the reports were from Trayvon's girlfriend that there was an altercation. Similarly, the police reports indicate that Zimmerman was bleeding from the nose and the back of the head. But after this altercation, neighbors report hearing gunfire. And Zimmerman acknowledges that he shot Trayvon Martin, he claimed, in self-defense. The police reports, obviously, show these injuries that Zimmerman had. He turned himself in on April 11, 2012, and he was charged with second-degree murder. In 2013, however, a 6-woman jury found Zimmerman not guilty. These jurors deliberated for more than 16 hours. So Zimmerman was tried as an individual according to the law. It was procedurally fair, but this case still brings up many questions about justice. And so I thought I would just show you a little clip of one of the jurors following this case.
It was a dramatic moment for America when the jury in the George Zimmerman trial finally delivered a verdict, not guilty, adding fuel to a fire of racial tensions flaring across the country. But what was it like for the jurors themselves? Tonight, one woman comes forward to tell us what happened on the other side of those closed doors. ABC's Robin Roberts sat down for an exclusive interview with a woman who felt the weight of the world on her shoulders.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
The not guilty verdict that set George Zimmerman free in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin rattled the nation, with many Americans questioning the jury's decision and wanting to ask the jurors a very tough question. Some people have said George Zimmerman got away with murder. How do you respond to those people who say that?
George Zimmerman got away with murder, but you can't get away from God.
Juror B29, Maddie, came forward today in an ABC News exclusive interview. She said it wasn't an easy decision.
It's hard for me to sleep. It's hard for me to eat.
You haven't asked for money. You haven't asked for a book deal. You haven't asked for anything other than a forum to be able to tell your story.
Yeah. I don't need money. No money in this world could pay me to forget the pain that I'm going through. Trayvon Martin will always be in my heart.
But she wanted to talk about the verdict, how the jury reached it, and about what she sees as perhaps a higher justice.
At the end of the day, he's going to have a lot of questions and answers he has to deal with. The law couldn't prove it. We just have to believe in the Lord that if he has to pay, he will pay.
Maddie says putting her emotions aside and only considering the law was not easy.
I stand by the decision because of the law. If I stand by the decision because of my heart, he would have been guilty.
A 36-year-old mother of 8 who calls herself a Black Hispanic was the only minority on the jury. Since the verdict and the public backlash, she says she has been ridden with guilt.
I feel that I was forcibly included in Trayvon Martin's death.
The shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin brought the issue of race in America back to the forefront. After Zimmerman's acquittal, outrage ignited across the country. So how do you respond when you see people who are making this about race, who are saying, had Trayvon not been a young Black man, that the conversation would be different?
Is it true? That's a question to be asked.
Even the president brought it up.
There are very few African-American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me.
Just like Obama, I go to a lot of places and they get people to follow me sometimes.
Trayvon Martin's parents' reaction to the verdict echoes the feelings of many Americans.
I really didn't believe that he was not guilty.
While George Zimmerman has remained silent, his parents spoke to ABC News, offering an apology to Trayvon's family.
We are deeply sorry for this tragedy.
Okay.
It was a dramatic moment for
In that clip, you can see all 4 types of justice. But I think what I want to bring your attention to or highlight is how important procedure was to that case. The juror says, I followed the law, and by the law, Zimmerman was not guilty. That was really important to her and to all the jurors, that the law be followed procedurally. But one of the astounding facts in this situation is that a Black teen with some Skittles and a drink appeared threatening to a 28-year-old man. Why is that? Well, one of the factors within this is that it was a gated community and that George Zimmerman was the neighborhood watchman for this gated community. I guess a question that we need to ask is, were the gates to keep out Black residents? The idea of a teen walking through an area and be in a hoodie with some Skittles isn't very threatening. But in this situation in the US, that kind of profile is what perhaps residents would maybe think was someone who was doing suspicious activity. And so in a sense, for walking through a gated community, Trayvon was executed. There was no trial for his actions. There was no ability for him to defend himself in court. There was just the threatening presence of a neighborhood watchman behind him and a wrong response. And this ended in his death. Is this justice for the African American community? And this is something that needs to be asked. This brings us to distributive justice or economic justice. This is about fairness or the fair share of resources. It's access. It's related to what people receive in the outcomes of processes, how society's resources are distributed, and the outcomes upon our lives. If people think that they're not getting a fair share of something, they will often seek to gain what they believe they deserve. They may seek, therefore, other forms of justice. So a society that distributes fairly is crucial to its stability and to the well-being of its members. So although we might agree, yes, resources should be distributed equally, there's often disagreement as to what constitutes a fair share. So this brings us to something that you may have asked: how can we live in a world where some people have so much and other people have so little? Is there anyone from the UK in the Zoom? Well, you can see a picture of the Queen. God bless the Queen. In 2019, the Queen received strong critique for delivering her annual Christmas message next to a solid gold piano. You know, this was seen as an issue of equality. At the same time, in the world, the World Bank estimates that around 10% of the population, or 734 million people, were living on less than US $2 a day. We call this absolute poverty. It's a precarious situation to be in. So how can some people in the world be born in garbage heaps and some people in the world be born into palaces with gold pianos? Is that just? And is it possible for someone to change their lives so much? Would someone born in the Philippines ever become queen? Well, the statistics show us that actually when it comes to redistributing or to income or, you know, moving out of your social class, in fact, in US cities, about 4% of people born into poverty will break from this. And so the international development community focus on reducing what's called inequality. So there are a couple of ways to think about reducing inequality. In some cases, it may require distribution or compensatory justice. This is where resources are redistributed to others. So in the picture, we can see how distributing resources equally via, you know, giving one box to each person, one box, this kind of a distribution process results in equality. So you can see that in the left-hand side of this picture. Everyone gets the same amount every time. This is procedural justice. Equity, however, means that the outcomes determine the distribution. So people who need more get more, while people who need less get less. Interestingly, and I love this, disability scholars have reimagined this image another way. So they say it's fantastic that in equity, you know, each of the people can see the game. But in inclusion, we would take away the fence and every single person would be allowed to participate in the game rather than being excluded from it. So that's distributive justice. We're going to move to the third type of justice that we're going to be looking at today, which is retributive justice. So in the clip, we hear from the juror, if he needs to pay, God will make sure that he pays in relation to George Zimmerman. This is the type of justice that she's talking about. It's the principle of punishment, or the idea that justice needs to dissuade people from bad actions. And so in this sense, to be justice, it must be fair and proportional to the wrongdoing. The violation within this type of justice is to the state. And the state pursues an offender on behalf of the victim and their loved ones. The courts seek to establish guilt. Did the person actually do what they were accused of doing? And if guilt is determined, then there is a retributive justice applied to this action. If you break laws, you suffer consequences. The concept is really visible in our local, our national, our state court systems, but most visible in our prison systems. However, some people have had, a big question around this type of justice, and they say, is this actually closer to revenge than to justice? We're going to talk about this a little bit. So retributive justice plays a huge role in our international community in responding to violations of international law, human rights, war crimes, and increasingly environmental damage that is done by multinational corporations. Unfortunately, though, one of the main problems about retributive justice is that it is applied retrospectively. So it's applied to actions that have already occurred in the past. With our environment, for example, there are many actions that have occurred in the past that are having a present impact upon vulnerable populations today. So the Pacific, there are Pacific communities who I've met who are having to relocate because the oceans are rising. It's not the people who have done the crime that are paying. There are other people paying. And this brings us to our fourth and our last type of justice that we'll be looking at today, which is restorative justice. This is founded on the idea of restitution, the idea that we put things back to how they should be. The simplest form of restitution is an apology, apologizing for the wrong that is done. And we saw that from George Zimmerman's parents, who so humbly sat there and said, we want to apologize for the actions of our son. In a procedural justice sense, it's not the parents who tried, but yet they felt that they wanted to contribute to this by offering their apology. This is restorative justice. Restoration seeks relationship that is offered, seeks the restoration of the relationship to the state before the harm occurred. And this not only takes into account the offender, but everybody who's been implicated in this situation. This is also known as corrective justice. And I'm going to show you a quick little clip about some of the places in which restorative justice is being outworked in real life. This is the outback town of Burke in Australia. It was the first place to bring together the community under a restorative justice framework. This video explains a little bit about the organisation called Just Reinvest New South Wales.
So I've grown up in Burke and I had a pretty good time. Made lots of friends, had lots of fun at the river, surrounded by family, and so I was very loved. And I think growing up here has really shaped who I am today. So for me, when I see a young person in Burke, I just see potential. And so I want to see that for all young people in Burke. Help them identify their dreams and their hopes and help them on their way, because that's what every child should have.
Marinuka means caring for others and offering help, and certainly the concept isn't new. We've been doing this for thousands of years, but putting it, I guess, into a contemporary empowerment framework to build a vibrant community again, which we made a commitment that no one would be left behind.
In late 2012, Alistair Ferguson, the chair of the Working Party, contacted Just Reinvest to help children and young people in Burke. And Justice Reinvestment is about finding ways to shift resources out of the prison system and the criminal justice system into communities to support early intervention and crime prevention and diversion.
For a small community like Burke, the key has been how you develop a safe space to have a conversation. And Marinuka is providing that platform to do that.
So we came to Burke and about 60 community members took part in what we call data conversations. And there was a universal agreement at the end of that day that they did want to prioritise what was happening with kids and young people to create safer communities.
Part of that, we have working groups, one on early childhood, one on 8 to 18-year-olds, and one on the role of men. And we have strategies so that we can try and meet the targets that have been set by the Burke Tribal Council.
The model is a collective impact model.
So what that means is corporate organisations and philanthropic organisations and other organisations who have relevant skills coming to assist government and community in making real solutions.
It's good that the grassroots people of Burke are nailed down on the actual issues. I think it's good to have all the organisation at the table so they're all on the same page.
Well, I certainly feel a change, and I see that firsthand, and it's how we're working more collaboratively together. I think that's been the key, and we're bringing the Aboriginal community along. That's really driving goodwill as part of this whole process.
I know certainly with incarceration rates of our juveniles in town, it's been a significant decrease over the last 2 years. Crime rates for things such as alcohol and drug-related violence, they're reducing. So, yeah, it's a good early sign.
Burke isn't dangerous because we've been constantly working towards creating a safe community. And I don't think it's overly ambitious to think we could become one of the safest communities in Australia, if not in the world.
It's really important to understand that you have to be ready to invest over a longer term, and that what you learn in communities is just so applicable to business process.
What other communities can learn from what's happening in Burke is that data informs meaningful conversations, and meaningful conversations lead to better decision making.
Sometimes Burke gets exposed for all the wrong reasons, and there's hardly a time where they get to showcase all the good stuff that's happening in Burke. And those working groups, it's all about coming up with a new way of delivering services and doing work with organisations and to set a good example, I suppose.
Burke does have a lot of heart, and I think that it links directly to the people that are here, and we need to listen to their voice. So that's the main message from me. Go out and listen to your young people, because they'll tell you what they want, and they'll tell you what they need. Yeah.
Well, that idea that our prisons would be empty because justice is done is a really beautiful one. But, you know, to close, like I said that we were going to talk about Christian justice and whether we should think about whether we need to cancel these concepts or whether Christianity can in fact perfect them. To say anything at all about that, we need to turn to the Bible. So really quickly, in Isaiah 61, we can read the following: I, the Lord, love justice. The word that is used here is mishpat. Similar to in ancient Greece, it means giving people their due. It meant treating people equitably, punishing the guilty, deciding the merits of a case regardless of social status. Does that sound like procedural and distributive justice, or retributive justice, sorry? But it was also used for caring for widows, orphans, immigrants, and the poor, and it was about redistributing some of the food to the priests so they also had something to eat. Does that sound like distributive justice? This word mishpat is often in the text paired with another word called tzedakah, or righteousness. Often when we use the word righteousness in church, we're talking about personal morality. Living a righteous life often is related to sexuality. So I'd like to instead use the word rightness, because that word actually within context has something very different and very communal about it. This word was being in right relationship with the earth, with other people, and with God. It's the kind of living that we use in the lyrics: clean hands, pure heart. It's that type of living. Does that sound a little bit like restorative justice? If we, in contemporary terms, we might want to think about the word mishpat as repairing the world, and the word tzedakah as caring for the world. This is really the mission that is bestowed by God upon the people of God. So I want to leave you with, firstly though, when it comes to Jesus actually was very clear about his purpose. In Isaiah 61, it prophesies his ministry, which is also confirmed in Luke 4. He says this: the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the blind, freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The story of Jesus says something really profound about the type of justice that God loves. It says something when Jesus gives up privilege and comes to earth as a human baby, only to stand in our place in taking justice, the type of retributive justice upon his body. God, who was utterly innocent, is convicted and dies a common criminal at the hands of the state. This is the act that triumphs over evil. He is the lion and the lamb. So what does this mean for the church and for those of us who's called to ministry? Tim Keller from New York City explains a Christian response this way: God loves and defends those with the least economic and social power, and so should we. That is what it means to do justice. And, you know, we can look at some of the scriptures, and if you're interested, I can give you the slides, but I just want to leave you with one idea. Imagine this, and this is not my idea. This is an idea from a Nigerian Pentecostal scholar called Nimiwa Oboko. He's one of my all-time greats. He basically talks about the idea of the Spirit moving throughout the world. No one church has claim to God's Spirit. God's Spirit is within the church. And he says that God's Spirit also moves out into the community. And so he gives us this term, the commons. Imagine if the church was the stewarder of the commons. This is a really old English concept. Basically, the commons was a place in which all of the, it was basically free land. And so any produce that was available on the commons could be used by all. So I'd like to present the idea of the church as stewarding a community garden. And everybody can take the carrots, the tomatoes, all of the things that are available. And that's available to the community in order for us to redistribute. And it's encapsulated a little bit in Isaiah 6 with these words: come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. I hope that you can imagine a little bit of an idea as what it would be like if the church was engaged completely in justice in our community. Thank you. I'm really ready. Questions?
That was amazing, Tanya. Well done. Oh my goodness. You literally made it till 11 a.m.
I know, sorry. There's a lot to say.
So good, you killed it. Well,
do you guys have any questions? No.
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Just on Luke 4 verse 18, it's quite a contentious verse because, of course, many scholars maintain that it's like an allegory for sin. And in fact, I think a lot of the Jewish people, when they saw Jesus, they saw him as like, when they're under Roman oppression, someone who liberate him from that, and that's where they got a bit disappointed. So is it possible that that verse is talking about sin? Because some parts of that verse, it says, set the oppressed free, release prisoners. I can't see anywhere in scripture where Jesus like literally did that. So that's why I'm leaning more toward the idea that it's an allegory for sin.
One of the really beautiful, it's definitely for sin. That's certainly a part of things. And I think, we all really have to understand both our individual and our communal sin. There's all kinds of ways in which we've fallen short of the expectation of God, particularly as outlined in Leviticus, for example. Some of the more communal understandings of how society should be ordered, we clearly fall short of those expectations of God looking after our poor and our widows and orphans. Those kinds of things are really clear in the text. So I think it's both individual and communal sin. But there are some really beautiful verses, like I was thinking about, the prisoners being set free as Paul is praising in the prison, and the shackles fall off. I think there is something to be said about, the need for us to really look at prisons, in that sense. There's a lot of really deep, understandings of who should be, put in prisons and when they should be set free. We don't any longer carry out the year of Jubilee. And so some of these justice issues come up in our class, and we look at that quite seriously and in depth. And it's certainly not an easy answer, that's for sure. And I think like some of what you've encapsulated is really true. And I think we also can maybe look at, prison systems quite analytically to think through what our responsibilities are there too.
Sure, yeah.
Incredible.
Great question.
That was such a good question, Jacob. We are actually up for time because chapel is about to start.
You guys need to
So what I'm going to do, everyone, is I'm going to drop a link so that you can actually tune into our chapel service right now. Oh, I think I DM'd Anina. Well, Anina, there you go. There's the link. Everyone feel free to head to that chapel service where the whole college community will be around to greet you. And if you guys do have any questions about like this topic, degree, or even the application process when it comes to Hillsong College, feel free to contact this email address. We're going to have a team readily available to contact you, meet you, hit you up, and just help you along the way. And one more thing, I'll quickly say this so that you all can enjoy chapel. We do have one giveaway. So I don't know if you guys have seen the other classes or tuned into any other classes before this, but in every virtual class, we've been giving away free merch. And so the random generator number thingy on Google told me that the winner of today's virtual class is number 4, which is Anina. Congratulations, Anina. So Anina, what I'm going to need from you is just to DM me or even email future.students@hillsong.com your email address, like your best go-to contact, and then we'll hit you up and then we'll sort out all the sizes from there, and then we'll send you your free merch. So there's that. And yeah, without further ado, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Head to chapel and we will see you there. Bye, guys.